producing animated short films.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, my name is Robert Jonathan Koeyers. I was born in Curaçao. It's like a small island in the Caribbean, and I was like 2 years old when I moved to the Netherlands, and I moved to like the northern part of the Netherlands. It's very white, and when I went to art school, I studied animation in Rotterdam. In my final year at the academy, I started like I always made very personal work, but this was like the first time that I also wanted to unpack what my cultural identity meant to me and what my Blackness meant to me. And this sort of coincided with also the moment where I saw all of these horrific police shootings happening in the United States. So as I was like constructing my graduation thesis film, yeah, the story sort of like slowly started presenting itself to me.
And what are some examples of animation that you find yourself one being influenced by and two a fan of? Like, what were some of your part of your portfolio of gotta watch whenever I get a chance?
Yeah, it's a good question. Animation wise, it's a lot of like there's a lot of like different animators, a lot of like in the independent scene. I would say like Arthur Treme is a really big influence. He makes 2D films, but it feels like there's a camera actually like filming these characters, and I always love that. So like this beautiful intersection between like animate and like an animated film while still feeling like a live action film. And yeah, great question. In terms of like style and inspiration, I think also Alex Grigg is like a really great example as well. He's a British or Australian filmmaker who's also been super influential in terms of storytelling, editing, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So how did you first hear about this specific story that you decided to focus your film on? Because you mentioned you're all the way to the Netherlands. How did you get a hold of this? And shootings happen. I can tell you, I'm from America. We get shooting news literally every single day on the news. Like it's every single day. So I mean, tell me what this specific story of what resonated with you to want to focus on and do a quarter hour on.
Yeah. I think it was like 2016 when there was like this one particular story of a man in a car who was shot, and his girlfriend was like in a passenger seat next to him, and she was live streaming everything. And I happened to see this live stream, and there was so much unfolding at the same time. You could hear her yelling and panicking, while you could also hear like the police officer outside of this car also panicking and yelling at himself like, what did I do? And their daughter was like in the back seat, trying to console her mother. All of these things were happening at the same time, and it was the first time that I also saw like a police officer panicking, as opposed to just like shooting someone in cold blood. So at that moment, there were so many narratives happening at once, and I wanted to explore that of like how do you make a film about one moment, one instance, but then show it from all these different perspectives of how they actually experienced it. And yeah, that's sort of like how it all culminated into this film.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up, because one of the things I took away from it, which I really actually enjoyed, is from being from America, it can be very easy to make something launching already from your like someone's inward perspective on something. And what happens is sometimes it can distort the outcome, especially in the documentary where you don't maybe get all the facts, you don't get both sides. And what I really appreciate about your film is you seem to have almost like a journalistic integrity on the film, where you wanted to get both sides of the story. You wanted to see not only what happened, but what are the ramifications of what happened on both sides. Because I mean, I know here in America, we do talk a lot about violence, urban violence, and that low income suburban violence, but you never ever hear from the police officer's point of view, almost ever, unless it's on a witness stand. So it was interesting that you went down that route. I mean, what was your inspiration in doing that, and what did was that on purpose to try to be kind of non-committal to either to either point of view and trying to make sure it's a straightforward, hey, let's make sure we present both cases and seemingly let the audience decide what they feel was the outcome here.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say witness stand, because that's very much how we approach this film, as two witnesses basically telling us the story, and the viewer becomes almost like a jury member, having to like decide themselves of sort of like puzzling everything together, like there's all these pieces sprinkled throughout the entire film, and they have to construct their narrative in their minds. So yeah, the film shows these both sides, and we're never wanting to choose a side or sort of like sympathize for sympathy's sake, but we wanted to show both characters as human beings, and explore beyond their facade and beyond their uniform who these people were, and how they would look back at this horrific incident. So yeah, it's also interesting that you say like journalistic approach, because for us it was also very much like a subjective film, right? It's about these two characters who are we're exploring their memories and how they felt about things. So whereas like the police officer looks at these children, and of course he's trying to justify his own actions, whereas like the girl is trying to remember the friend that she lost. So that's how we approached it.
Interesting. And from the aesthetic of the film, you definitely give us a very very gritty, visceral type of aesthetic to the, you don't really it's not if you're looking for a bright film, something that shows up, you know what I mean, like that sort of a thing. It's definitely not that. It's definitely a lot in the dark. And I think that's kind of intentional, because it seems like you are meant, this was a crime that happened in the dark. So I mean, was that always kind of like the pathos of what you were kind of looking for? Like, hey, this is a dark story, it's a dark movie. We're not showing, a sunny day with, butterflies going all over the place. We really want to, show like, hey, this is kind of what the streets are like.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to contrast sort of like this grittiness, but with also something that felt a little bit lighter. So we feel like the girl's perspective feels a bit more romanticized, or a little bit more things feel a little bit more hopeful, whereas with like the police officer's perspective, it's like it is indeed like very nocturnal, and it's dark and it's gritty. So going that back and forth, and also switching between these two perspectives.
She sounded sad though, that's why I kind of thought like, even with it being upright, she sounded sad and retelling it. So I was getting the sense of, it might have looked brighter, but it's kind of like a sad, you know what I mean? Like, I'm looking at a brighter day at one point, but it gets darker.
I mean, I thought for a very long time of like, when does this take place? When we hear them talking throughout the entire film, and it's basically they're being interviewed, and it's in our minds it's like a day after the incident, or hours, moments after the incident. So they are processing everything as they're recollecting everything. So everything that we're seeing is also through their lens and through how they see things or memorize things. So there's a little bit of beauty, but there's definitely also a lot of like darkness and grittiness.
Yeah, and one of the other interesting things I think you highlighted on was in David's perspective. You built up the fact that, hey, this is a kind of a rookie, kind of a cop, sort of almost like a training day, like what happens in Denzel's Training Day. It's it's a young rookie cop with a brand new baby, and then he makes a mistake that affects the rest of his life, and he clearly looked like he was not ready for that job. And I bring that up only to say, when you look at the Netherlands, and I actually pointed this out in our article, the ramp up time to be a police officer in Netherlands is a lot different than it is in America. For Netherlands, it's like a few years, I think. And correct me if I'm wrong, you probably know more than I do. I mean, in terms of the years of training you get before you're allowed out on the streets. Whereas in America, it's like, 18 months maybe, and then you're thrown right out into the wild to deal with both the physical, but also the emotional and the build, maybe whatever pent up, whatever you have for 18 months of getting out on the streets. So what was that surprising? I mean, what was that in trying to really develop David's perspective and kind of say, hey, look, yeah, he made a wrong move here, but at the same time, it might be systemic in the fact that he just maybe wasn't trained very well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's also why we wanted to eventually sort of like humanize him in a sense, because we didn't want to just show him as a typical villain or a bad guy, because we wanted to show that it could happen to any police officer, and it is a systemic problem, and it has something to do with training. So we wanted to show him as human as possible, and he has a wife and he has a kid, and it starts off very bright and rosy. But at the end of the day, yeah, he's new there, and there's a lot of pressure probably being a police officer, but also just like, yeah, systemically, how do you get trained, and how do you get trained to look at Black people as well in situations like these, and how do you deal with implicit biases like these? So all of these things come together in showing like, or ultimately like the action that he takes. Yeah.
Did you kind of get a sense of, with your own having grown up in as you just mentioned before, a very white country, and having that sort of, hey, it's can be a culture shock to people who don't know, who don't experience that every day. What's that been like to try to, you grew up in that type of an environment, and then you see like, oh, well, there's a difference probably between Black America and Black Netherlands, and the cultures, and what are some of the differences did you find in those two cultures as you were kind of going through, scripting and all that good stuff?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, there's a lot of differences also just in terms of the conversation and where the conversation is. I feel like I don't know, my experiences here, things are very implicit, or things are a lot more sort of like insidious, where in the United States, it feels like things are more outspoken, and things are talked about. So the conversation is also at a different place. So for this film, what was important for me was that I was traveling a lot as well. So I went to the United States, and I also went to different parts of the world, and for research purposes of like, what is being Black here like, and how can I put my own personal experience, but also that of others into this film, so I could create like an authentic story and authentic characters that feel like real people.
Yeah, and then of course, I think you captured, kind of like the American sentiment of, what eventually became, Black Lives Matter and that sort of thing. Had you had more time, what do you think are some areas that you would have liked to have focused on? Do you think it would have been more of this story? Would you have liked to dug in deeper into, hey, here's the setting, and why the setting is what it is, and what do you think? What are some areas that you think you would have dug in on if you gave it more time? If you want to do like 90 minutes, let's say, and you could focus on just the story. What do you think would be part of that?
Yeah, that's no one ever asked me that question. That's a really good question. What if this film is 90 minutes? Yeah. Well, I think we were very much like influenced by also the world events, and also by Black Lives Matter. We were like in the middle of working on this film when the George Floyd protest happened. So we were very much informed by it, but we were already like animating it. We were already like working on it. So perhaps now I would focus also on perhaps the ramifications of it all afterwards. What does a protest look like, and focus on how the world reacts to or mourns or processes like a death like this, and carried it on like that. Yeah.
What are some looking into the future, Robert? I think you got a really bright future here, and again, congratulations and everything. But I'll leave you with this one. What does the future look like for you in terms of, what are some other projects that you want to work on? Are they animated? Are they live action? What's coming down the pike for Robert? What are some ideas that you have that maybe fans who are just now discovering you can maybe look forward to?
Yeah. I think animation is, I love animation. Like, I'm an animator and I've studied it, and I also teach animation as well. But to me, the story comes first always. Like the characters and the world comes first, and then I have to find reasons why it has to be animated. So I think for now I want to focus like on more personal stories, on Black stories as well, of people that look like me, and tell the stories that I didn't get to tell for a very long time, and you know, make little stories about families, or love stories, and some of them are going to be animated, some of them are perhaps going to be like more of a mix between live action and animation. But whatever it is, I want to, yeah, it needs to feel authentic and it needs to be told in a vulnerable way, I think.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, Robert, I'll leave you with that. And I just wanted to say again, congratulations and everything. I hope you. I love that he sees something from you about like some of my favorite music comes from the Netherlands and Sweden area.
Really?
So I would love to see your advantage on that type of stuff. You know, so if you're ever working on that type of stuff, you know, I'd love
Cool.
to, you know, let's get your take on it.
Absolutely.
But all right, Robert. Well, I'll let you go. Brooke, thanks so much for helping put together the call. Robert, good luck with everything.